about the human rights concerns about other critical mineral conversions in China that go into a green energy economy that is supposed to be environmentally, socially, and have governance accords. And yet, somehow or other, it fails on all of those. It fails because it's coal-powered production. It fails because it's made by socially, well, I hope she agrees, socially undesirable slave labour, and governance because there's no oversight. Will she have those same conversations within her own government?
He's quite right to point out these pressing concerns, and all will be revealed when the China audit comes forward with specifics on his question.
Ellie Chowns.
Question number 9, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Sir?
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll answer questions 9 and 20 together. I am deeply concerned about the resumption of hostilities in Gaza. The Foreign Secretary and I are pressing all parties to return urgently to dialogue and to implement the ceasefire agreement in full. Since the renewed outbreak of hostilities, the Foreign Secretary has spoken to Secretary Rubio, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, EU High Representative Kallas, and the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Tom Fletcher. We've also been working with our French, German and Italian partners in support of the Arab Plan for the reconstruction of Gaza as part of wider peace-building efforts.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you. I thank the Minister for his response. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's often said that actions speak louder than words. The government has repeatedly condemned what's happening in Gaza and in the West Bank, and yet Israeli settler violence, Israeli settlement expansion, unlawful demolition of Palestinian homes and violence in Gaza is continuing. Given that UK diplomatic efforts and condemnations are being so roundly ignored, will the UK now take action and ban the importation of products from illegal settlements on illegally occupied land to give the signal that Israel cannot break international law with complete impunity?
Good question.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions. She will know the importance we have placed on international law since we came to power in July. We have been clear throughout this period we want to see a ceasefire in Gaza. We regret that at this point we are still in disagreement with the Israeli government, and we regret the scenes in the last few weeks, both in relation to the West Bank and Gaza. In relation to settlement goods, as the Foreign Secretary said earlier in this session, and I've said before, different provisions exist for illegal settlements which we consider illegal, which do not benefit from any of the provisions that would otherwise cover goods from Israel.
Dr. Zubair Ahmed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the last week, I've been in touch with medical colleagues on the ground in Gaza and also with representatives of hostage families in Israel. In Gaza, they corroborate the worrying UN reports of a shallow grave containing the bodies of 15 paramedics and rescue workers, seemingly shot one by the Israeli army, some of them still wearing their surgical gloves that they were using to save the lives of others. In Israel, hostage families feel increasingly distant from their own government and abandoned from them. Hamas, of course, is a terrorist organisation, but Israel is an ally. Can I ask the Minister, as a critical friend and ally, what further steps can we take to reinforce our message that the Israeli government's current trajectory is destructive for peace and indeed for their own interests?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend, a surgeon himself, who I know has been closely engaged both with the medical questions in Gaza and also the incredible bravery of those who provide that assistance, is right to ask this question. As I said to the Honourable Lady in my previous answer, the scenes in Gaza, both in relation to aid workers and of course Gazan civilians themselves, are absolutely horrific. It is why, with France, we called a special session of the UN Security Council on Friday, and we will continue to press with all diplomatic levers to see an improvement.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What assessment has the government made of reports that Iran is considering preemptive strikes against American B-2 Spirit bombers that it has forward located recently in Diego Garcia?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the House would understand, I won't provide a detailed commentary on reporting, but we remain deeply conscious of the potential threats from Iran, both in this country and in the region. We continue to have dialogue with the Iranian government. The Foreign Secretary spoke to his equivalent just last week. We treat these matters with the utmost seriousness, as he would expect.
Uma Cameron.
Speaker, like many, I was extremely alarmed to hear the Israeli Defence Minister Katz threaten the total destruction of Gaza. The UK and its allies are committed to a two-state solution, but this only works if there is a state for Palestinians left standing. Exactly. Is this minister ever going to be sanctioned? And can our minister set out what role he sees the UK playing in the long-term reconstruction of Gaza?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and I know how attentive to these issues she has been. The Foreign Secretary has condemned in this chamber the comments of Defence Minister Katz, and this government is clear what the path to reconstruction in Gaza must be. We have engaged closely with our partners in the Arab world. We welcome their plan for reconstructing Gaza, and we will continue to do all we can to see that as the path to a reconstruction with dignity for the Palestinian people of Gaza.
Shaukat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today is the anniversary of the killing of the 33-year-old ex-Royal Marine James Henderson, who was killed by the Israelis alongside 7 of his aid workers for the World Central Kitchen. A year later, as my honourable member has already mentioned, we find mass graves with 8 bodies working for the Red Crescent Society and the Red Cross Society. This is 2 weeks from the 8 aid workers that were killed from the El Khair Foundation. It is believed now that 1,500 aid workers have been killed. Does the Secretary of State believe it is illegal under international law to kill aid workers? And if so, what are you prepared to do? What are they prepared to do about it?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for an opportunity to comment. Today is indeed the one-year anniversary of the appalling strike on the World Central Kitchen convoy. It killed 7 people, including British citizens John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby. I'd like to pay tribute to their bravery and remember again the appalling tragedy of that day. I met, alongside the Foreign Secretary, these families in November. They are determined to see justice for their family members, and I know the whole chamber will be united in that determination. Israel's military advocate general must quickly and thoroughly conclude their consideration of the strike, including determining whether criminal proceedings should be initiated. As the honourable gentleman has said, Gaza is now the most dangerous place in the world to be an aid worker. This cannot continue.
Alex Ballinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As others have said, today is the anniversary of the deaths of James Kirby, John Chapman and James Henderson, 3 former servicemen. And we further heard about the 15 aid workers that were killed last week, that the Under-Secretary General for the UN, Tom Fletcher, described as killing one by one, burying them in shallow graves alongside their clearly marked ambulances, fire trucks and UN vehicles. I want to thank the government for calling a UN Security Council meeting on the protection of aid workers. Can you now update us on the House of the outcome of that meeting? Oh, sorry, can the Minister, I apologise. Could the Minister update us on the outcome of that meeting and what further steps we are taking to protect aid workers in Gaza?
I thank my honourable friends for the question. The meeting on Friday considered these questions. There was agreement across the Security Council of the importance of preserving the space for humanitarian action. As I've said already to this House this morning, we regret deeply that there has not yet been further improvements, and we will continue to use all diplomatic steps available to ensure that aid gets into Gaza, aid workers are protected, and the horrific scenes which were described by the Emergency Relief Coordinator are not repeated.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our thoughts continue to be with the hostages held in Hamas captivity in Gaza and their families. Can the Minister tell the House what recent contacts he's had with counterparts in Israel, America and our partners in the region to secure their release and try and broker a way through this current impasse? What steps are being taken across the government to address the threats to stability posed by Iran, and can he update the House on how he envisages the removal of Hamas from the governance of Gaza?
Madam Deputy Speaker, on the very important first point that the Shadow Foreign Secretary makes, we are, as she would expect, in regular contact with all of those involved in negotiations. The Foreign Secretary spoke to the Israeli Foreign Minister last week. I've been in regular contact with the Qataris who are doing important work in this file, and as she would expect, we are also continuing to be in touch with the hostage families, whose thoughts I know the Chamber continues to share. In relation to the threats of Iran, we too also speak to relevant players in the region and also in the E3. As I said earlier in response to a different question, the Foreign Secretary spoke to the Iranian Foreign Minister last week, underlined that we do still continue to support a diplomatic resolution to the tensions with Iran. We do not want to see Iran secure a nuclear weapon. We believe a diplomatic solution is the best way to achieve that, but we will hold the snapback of sanctions and indeed many other measures under review until we are satisfied.
Andrew Ranger.
Question 10, please, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, with permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll answer questions 10 and 16 together. The SCDO is leading international efforts to keep up the pressure on Russia through over 2,200 sanctions that have helped to reduce Russia's oil revenue by 25% between January and November 2024 compared to 2 years previously. We're of course also working hard to coordinate allies. Just yesterday I was in Madrid discussing these issues with European counterparts, and later this week I will be at the NATO Foreign Ministers Conference with Ukrainians as well.
Andrew Ranger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for that answer. Since the onset of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I am incredibly proud that Wrexham has warmly welcomed many Ukrainian families, among them Yaroslav and Oksana, who had long dreamed of opening a cafe in their hometown of Chortkiv. Despite the war preventing them from realising that dream at home, they now have a thriving business in Wrexham High Street. Please would the Secretary of State provide an update on how the government is continuing to support Ukrainian families who play a big part of our communities across Britain, as well as those who at some point in the future may wish to return to Ukraine when the situation allows.
Well, I'm proud that the British people across our country have opened their homes and their hearts to Ukrainians fleeing Russia's brutal war. The Homes for Ukraine scheme has helped over 160,000 Ukrainians find refuge here, and since the 4th of February, Ukrainian refugees can apply to remain for an additional 18 months whilst continuing to receive vital support.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Foreign Secretary knows, we have a substantial engagement with and deployment to Estonia. And of course, talk of peace in Ukraine is very welcome, and Britain should play its role in supporting that peace. But would the Foreign Secretary accept that any deployment of British troops to Ukraine increases the risk to the UK and its forces in Estonia?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that he should know that the UK's commitment to the security of Estonia is ironclad, made real by our NATO forward land forces deployment. Discussions, of course, regarding our military, how our military can support Ukraine's future security arrangements are ongoing, including with NATO allies and Secretary-General Ruto. Part of the discussion for countries committed to the coalition of the willing is to ensure that those countries on the front line aren't left without the adequate support. So he raises a very important issue.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel.
Deputy Speaker. The whole House continues to stand united with the people of Ukraine in their existential struggle. Although there's been much coverage of tentative steps towards a Black Sea ceasefire, with the brutal war raging on land, does the Foreign Secretary agree that we must continue to constrain Putin's war machine with every tool at our disposal? Could he update us on his plans for doing so beyond sanctions? And does he agree that the onus remains squarely on Putin to prove whether he is in any way serious about the kind of lasting and just peace that President Zelensky wants to see?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, and she should know that amongst EU colleagues yesterday at the G7 a few weeks ago, and I'm sure with colleagues as I head to NATO, we are discussing issues around an oil cap, particularly, and how that would limit Putin's reserves. We continue to discuss issues, as she knows, around not just the freezing of assets, but the seizing of assets, recognising that there are European colleagues who are more exposed than we in the UK are, but nevertheless, why should we use taxpayers' money? We should use Russian money that has caused so much damage in Ukraine. And of course, we continue to look at the arsenal of sanctions that we can use, and I'm sure I'll have more to say on this in the coming weeks.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of all the horrors that Vladimir Putin has inflicted on Ukraine, the abduction of more than 20,000 Ukrainian children is one of the most vile. It threatens to rob Ukraine of its future, which is surely Putin's ultimate goal. The Prime Minister praised the work of Kyiv's Bring Back Kids initiative last week. Will the Foreign Secretary now commit that the UK will fill the funding gap left by the Trump administration's withdrawal of funding to the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab so it can continue to research Russia's war crimes and especially to track the whereabouts of these children so that they can be brought back home?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. It was important for me to meet with Madam Zelensky on this issue when I was last in Ukraine. My honourable friend also met with the minister in Ukraine on this issue just a few days ago. I can absolutely give an undertaking to continue to support the group. It is not our assessment that we can meet the shortfall met by the withdrawal of US ID, but we will continue to work with partners across Europe on this very important issue and one that's very personal to me. Thank you.
Chamberlain.
Question 11, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Minister.
Aid should never be used as a political tool. As the Foreign Secretary made clear to this House on the 20th March, blocking humanitarian aid into Gaza is appalling and unacceptable. Israel must allow aid into Gaza immediately. The Foreign Secretary made this clear to Israeli Foreign Minister Saar on the 21st of March and issued a joint statement with his French and German counterparts on the 5th. Gaza is the deadliest place in the world to be an aid worker. Over 400 aid workers have been killed in the conflict. Restoring the ceasefire remains the best chance to see hostages release, a surge of humanitarian aid, and bring this bloodshed to an end.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's clear from the Chamber already this morning that we all despair at the recent breakdown of the ceasefire agreement, the resumption of hostilities and the blockade of aid into Gaza. And now we have warnings of an unprecedented humanitarian disaster in the Gaza Strip, which is very hard to imagine after what we've already seen there. The Minister mentioned the conversations that have been had with Israel. Can he assure me that we are making clear that the only way we will achieve a lasting peace is through a two-state solution, and that is not achieved by subjecting people to such hardships? And secondly, what conversations are ongoing with allies about restoring aid drops directly into Gaza itself?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can confirm that we say regularly to our Israeli counterparts, and indeed to all others in the region, the only route out of these horrors is a two-state solution. It's an outcome which provides for both the safety, security and dignity of both peoples. We are talking with our partners too about what might be done in order to try and ensure aid gets into Gaza through whatever means at our disposal. But at its core, Israel must relax the restrictions and allow aid into Gaza. That is the way to get the scale of aid into the Strip that is required. And we saw during the ceasefire the massive increase in aid, and that is what we want to see.
Brian Leishman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. With continued aerial bombardment impacting the flow of aid into Gaza, can the Foreign Secretary confirm if UK-made F-35 parts have been used to enable airstrikes in Gaza since the 18th of March this year?
Madam Deputy Speaker, just to clarify my previous answer, it was on the 5th of March that the Foreign Secretary spoke to Foreign Minister Saar, not the 21st. In response to the question of my honourable friend, we will continue to press these issues with the Israeli government. It is clear to this House that we have not succeeded over these long months in ensuring the level of aid into Gaza that we would like to see. It is clear that we have not had the protections for humanitarian workers that we want to see. Deconfliction with humanitarian aid workers is a vital part of ensuring their security, and we're pressing the Israelis to do so.
Alex Meyer.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the United Kingdom is committed to promoting and protecting human rights and the rule of law, and the right to self-determination is, of course, set out in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
Alex Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 700,000 people in Washington, D.C. are currently disenfranchised because their representatives in the Senate and the House of Representatives don't have voting rights or full control of local government affairs. It's the equivalent of everyone in Bedfordshire voting for MPs and having no chance to go through the voting lobbies. Does the Minister agree that this is a particularly strange anomaly?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, this isn't a matter for us. The United States is a sovereign democratic nation, and the issue of voting rights in the District of Columbia is, of course, a matter for the United States.
Sir Roger Gale.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in the interests of self-determination, would the Foreign Secretary take the earliest opportunity to remind his opposite number in the United States that Canada has chosen to be a member state of the Commonwealth, that the head of the Commonwealth and the head of state of Canada is His Majesty King Charles, and that there is no prospect whatsoever of Canada being annexed by the United States?
Well, Canada, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a strong friend and Commonwealth ally, and of course a NATO ally and a fellow G7 member. I have strong ties with Canada myself, as the Honourable Gentleman might know, and of course I was delighted to reiterate our friendship when I met my ministerial counterpart the other week, and indeed, of course, Prime Minister Carney, the new Canadian Prime Minister, was welcomed by the Prime Minister, and of course the Foreign Secretary has been meeting with his counterpart in recent weeks, and we continue to work strongly with Canada on many issues globally.
Vicky Slade.
Question 13, please, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Foreign Secretary.
We're concerned at the expansion of the government of Israel's war aims and operations in the West Bank. I made clear my serious concerns on the continuing Israeli operations when I spoke to the Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, as my honourable friend says, on the 5th of March, but also on the 21st of March, and we're clear that civilians must be protected and the destruction of civilian infrastructure minimised.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It emerged today that a 17-year-old Palestinian boy taken from the West Bank has died in Israeli detention, having been held for 6 months without charge. And Israel has also been striking inside the West Bank, and in doing so emboldening illegal settlers in their own violence. Given Israel claims that their target is Hamas and not the people of Palestine itself, what specific actions is the Foreign Secretary taking to protect Palestinians in the West Bank from both settler violence and Israeli forces?
Well, the Honourable Lady will know that we are giving considerable support to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. We are in regular contact with President Abbas and Prime Minister Mustafa in relation to the West Bank. She has heard our concerns about both the violence and the expansion that is taking place in the West Bank. I do say to her, though, that in my conversation with ministers, there are legitimate concerns about security on the Israeli side and the way that Iran, sitting behind the scenes, is equipping some terrorist groups with guns and ammunition, and we also have to do our best to support Israel in standing up to that.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister's commitment to host an international meeting this year in support of an international fund for Israeli-Palestinian peace seems to me to have never been more timely. And given the upcoming June summit in Paris in support of a two-state solution, I wonder if the Foreign Secretary can provide for the House an update on progress towards meeting the Prime Minister's pledge.
Well, we're very grateful to the work that our French colleagues are doing in this regard, and we're working closely with them. We are putting together a plan, and I hope that the Minister will be able to update the House in the coming weeks.
Jessica Morden.
Number 14, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend for this important question? And the Foreign Secretary spoke with his Azerbaijani and Armenian counterparts on the 19th and 21st of March. Respectively, I've also been in contact with representatives of both countries. We warmly welcome the progress made by both sides on concluding negotiations on the text of a peace agreement. We urge them both to sign that agreement as soon as possible, and we encourage all sides to refrain from rhetoric or actions that undermine the prospects for peace.
Jessica Morden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's clearly a critical time for peace in the region, and the offensive by Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh resulted in a forced displacement of up to 120,000 Armenians, and also continued detention of 23 officials and civilians. There's much concern about the conduct of the trials, about their welfare and about their access to legal support. So what more can the Minister do to put pressure on the government of Azerbaijan to look for their release and to get access to the prisoners?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for important work on these issues, and the UK has consistently called for the release of all the remaining prisoners of war. We continue to urge the Azerbaijani authorities to ensure those detained during its long-standing conflict with Armenia are afforded a fair trial and provided safe conditions. And I raised this specifically with the Azerbaijani President's Special Representative in October, and we continue to engage with them on this issue.
Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday was the anniversary of the actually attempted genocide of the Azerbaijani people by the Armenians, and I'm sure the whole House would issue our condolences for that purpose. But still, in the newly liberated territories of Nagorno-Karabakh, there are literally hundreds of mines that are being cleared literally by hand. What action is the government going to offer in terms of support to Azerbaijan in removing these mines so that the land can be used for beneficial purposes?
Well, he rightly raises the issue of mines, and he will know the important role this country has played in demining efforts around the world. And I'm very happy to write some of the details of where we are on that in relation to Azerbaijan, but we've discussed it with them on a number of occasions. But I think the most important thing is that we continue to work towards the signing of that peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, so that the people of those two countries, which we have strong relationships with, can live in peace and harmony alongside one another.
Peter Bedford.
Question 15, please.
Minister. Any Minister? Foreign Secretary? Minister?
It's me again. Madam Deputy Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions number 15 and 19 together. As we and Mauritius have repeatedly said, including in joint statements on the 20th of December and the 13th of January, both sides remain committed to concluding a deal on the future of the Chagos Archipelago, which protects the long-term effective operation of the joint UK-US base on Diego Garcia. And once the treaty is signed, it will be put to Parliament for scrutiny before ratification in the usual way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given that there is no binding legal basis, indeed, for the ceding of the Chagos Islands, and that the deal will cost the hard-pressed British taxpayer north of 9, 18, possibly £50 billion a year, will the Secretary of State confirm what total financial liabilities will be brought to the UK, and whether this will be funded from the uplift in the defence budget announced in the spring statement?
Well, Deputy Speaker, I have answered these questions on a number of occasions, including earlier on. I've been very, very clear that a financial element was crucial to protect the operation of such a vital base for our security, for the security of our allies. Once the treaty is signed, it will be put before Houses for scrutiny before ratification in the usual way. This will include costs, and we're not going to scrimp on security. Protecting our interests and those of our allies is the most important thing.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Politics is about choices, and the speculation around how much the government wants to hand over to Mauritius starts at £9 billion. That goes a long way with ODA. Does he regret this choice?
Deputy Speaker, as I've said, a financial element, let's remember this is over 99 years, was crucial to protect the operation of the base. And if we don't pay for our security, somebody else might attempt to get in there. And that is one of the crucial reasons why we have worked closely with Mauritius, with the United States, with other allies, with other partners, including India, to protect our base on Diego Garcia. I can hear the chuntering from the Shadow Minister, but it is simply not correct. We are protecting Diego Garcia. We are protecting our interests there. We're protecting our national security. I'm afraid I simply don't accept what he's saying. And of course, if there wasn't a problem, why did his government start the negotiations in the first place?
We're now moving on to topicals, and I call Munira Wilson.
Number 1, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, yesterday in Madrid, I discussed with counterparts strengthening Ukraine's hand. With the Speaker in Kyiv yesterday, the House is united on Ukraine, Madam Deputy Speaker. 1 year on, the appalling IDF strike on the World Central Kitchen convoy killed James Kirby, John Chapman and James Henderson. I'm sure the whole House mourns their loss and calls for accountability. And we will keep demanding protection of all civilians and aid workers in Gaza and strive to restore the ceasefire, free hostages and end this war.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Research published by UNICEF shows that last time the overseas aid budget was cut, it was support for children, for their education and for their nutrition that was cut the deepest. So will the Foreign Secretary give assurances to this House that this time his cut won't, children won't bear the brunt of his cuts, and will he commit to protecting child-focused development programmes?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, the last time it was cut overnight. The government abolished DFID. There were terrible cliff edges, and our reputation was badly damaged in the world. We're not throwing the money that we have had to withdraw from development into a black hole like the last government. What we are doing is investing in hard power. She will recognise that war in Ukraine has cost the continent of Africa £7 billion and upwards. And it's for that reason that it's important we invest in hard power, we invest in diplomacy, and we continue to invest in development. We will still be the 6th biggest development partner.
Patrick Hurley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The cooperative movement has a long and proud history in helping to rebuild local economies post-conflict. So in this, the UN Year of Cooperatives, will the Minister agree to meet with me and representatives of the cooperative movement to discuss the ways in which government can promote cooperation as a solution on the global stage?
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll be delighted to meet with him and his colleagues, and not least as a cooperative MP. I've seen important work cooperatives do around the world, and we continue to support cooperatives, including funding the Global Agriculture and Food Security Programme, which has a dedicated support facility for smallholder producer organisations, and we regularly meet with those who are involved in cooperative solutions in a range of matters, and so I'll be delighted to discuss these matters with him and other colleagues.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel.
Deputy Speaker, last month the Foreign Secretary gave a speech on trade, but could not explain how much, if any, growth would follow the measures he announced. So what role is the FCDO actually playing in supporting the trade negotiations with the United States? What discussions has the Foreign Secretary personally undertaken about the trade agreement? And can he confirm this will be a comprehensive trade deal that the Conservative government was negotiating?
No, because the Conservative government badly failed in their negotiations with the US. We are engaged in intense conversations to strike an economic agreement at this time. We continue discussions with our Indian counterparts also on a trade deal, and with the Gulf, picking up the failure of the last government to land the trade deals that will deliver growth to this country. And in coming into the Foreign Office, it's been absolutely essential that I position the Foreign Office as the international delivery arm for growth. All of our missions recognise this. I announced measures that included working much closely with business, measures that should have been done under the last government.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel.
Deputy Speaker, we know that the Labour government continue to cozy up to the Chinese Communist Party because they are desperately seeking growth. With the government unable and unwilling to stop solar panels, they might want to listen, they are unwilling to stop solar panels being made by Uyghur slave labour coming into the UK, unable to stop China putting bounties on the head of Hong Kongers living here, failing to put China on the enhanced tier of furs. Can the Foreign Secretary explain how our economic and security interests are being served by Labour government's alleged reset with the CPP government?
I mean, the Honourable Lady, uses the phrase CCP almost as if to suggest that I'm some sort of communist. I mean, look, the last government had 17 different approaches to China on counting. It bounced around so much. There was the Ian Duncan Smith position, the Rishi Sunak position, the Liz Truss position. We've lost count at how many positions. We've been clear that there are areas where we will cooperate with China, there are areas where we will challenge China, and there are areas where we must necessarily compete. It's right that we engage with China. Closing our ears, pretending they're not there, is no strategy, and that's why the government has absolutely changed the strategy of the last government.
And the Foreign Secretary doesn't need to be reminded that we don't reference sitting members by their names but by their constituencies. Neil Duncan-Jordan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as has already been mentioned in the Chamber, this morning. A year ago today, my constituent John Chapman was murdered by the Israeli Defence Force while working for World Central Kitchen, delivering humanitarian aid in Gaza. His family now want to know when the Israeli government is going to bring criminal charges against the perpetrators, when they will be awarded compensation for their tragic loss, and what our government is doing to ensure justice prevails.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for that question. Last month, I pressed Foreign Minister Saar to conclude the Military Advocate General's consideration of the World Central Kitchen incident, including determining whether criminal proceedings should be initiated. I've met the families of those killed in the attacks and assured them that this government will continue to support their calls for justice. Gaza is the most dangerous place in the world to be an aid worker, with over 400 killed since the start of this conflict. We need to see lasting safety improvements for aid workers on the ground, and that is a fitting legacy to those British individuals that have lost their lives.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents who work at the BMW mini plant in Cowley are deeply concerned about the impact of Donald Trump's global tariff war. The uncertainty the plant faces is made much worse by the red tape that now inhibits integrated car production with suppliers in the EU. So does the Foreign Secretary agree that, in addition to a robust response to the White House, the best step the government could take to support British businesses would be to start talks on a bespoke UK-EU customs union without delay?
We are an open trading nation. We have been that under successive governments. It's hugely important at this time that we continue the intense conversations we're having with the US administration on getting an economic agreement, that of course we prepare for the worst. All options remain on the table, as the Prime Minister indicated again just yesterday. But it's also right that the Business Secretary and I and others across government continue to engage with business and industry so we can give them the best support at what will be a turbulent economic time, not just for our own country, but across much of the world.
Topical questions must be kept short, otherwise there'll be many disappointed colleagues. Chris Kane.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the recent decline in the number of international students coming to the UK, what measures is the Minister taking, along with colleagues from other departments, to ensure that universities like Stirling, which have long benefited from diverse international student populations, remain attractive and accessible to prospective students from abroad?
Our strong knowledge economy is one of our best exports, and each minister on the front bench makes sure to promote learning in the UK and learning in people's home cities where our campuses have presence there, and we will continue to do so.
Father of the House, Sir Ridley.
I'm a simple soul, so I trust the Foreign Secretary completely. Will he assure me that nothing in the product regulation and metrology bill, which we're debating only this afternoon, will in any way nullify Brexit by limiting our deal to make our own decisions on regulation and to conduct our own free trade deals? And above all, as a great British patriot, will he assure me that nothing in the bill will allow any minister to ever abolish that most glorious of British symbols, the Great British Pint?
Well, can I assure the right honourable gentleman that the British pint is safe under this government? I will write to him on the detail in the coming days, though.
Luke Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary what discussions are being had with China with regards Xingye, the Chinese owner of British Steel, who last week rejected a generous offer from the government to put the industry on a stable footing? Does he agree with me that Xingye, for the importance of this strategic industry, need to come back to the table and agree a deal? And if they will not, that we ought to step in and make sure British steel is made in Britain?
Well, I have regular conversation with the Business Secretary. As the Minister for Industry made clear on Thursday, this government believes in the UK steel sector. We've prioritised engagement with British Steel and have made a generous conditional offer of financial support. We remain in negotiations with the company and trade unions to find the best possible outcome.
Neil Shastri-Hurst.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
What further information did the Foreign Secretary have that led him to make a different decision to the detailed objections from the police, the security services and our allies, and support the new Chinese super embassy? And will he share it with the House?
The honourable gentleman must have missed the letter that I and the Home Secretary, quite properly, wrote to the Secretary of State for Local Government, who, acting in her quasi-judicial position, has a decision to make. But we were clear that security interests are paramount, and we made our views very clear so they can be considered.
Rena Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last Monday, the 24th of March, another 2 journalists were killed in Gaza. There have been over 200 journalists killed in Gaza since October the 7th, 2023. Additionally, last week we saw the arrests of both BBC and Swedish journalists, as well as many local journalists covering the unrest in Turkey. Can I ask the Minister to outline what the Government is doing to protect the role of journalists, regardless of nationality, who are showcasing what's going on in conflict zones?
My honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker, asks a vital question. Whether in Gaza, Turkey or elsewhere, it is vital that journalists are able to do their job. We are incredibly proud of the BBC and all other UK outlets overseas who do a vital role in holding power to account, and we will continue to support them.
Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are 59 Israeli hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, kidnapped in their terrorist attack of the 7th of October 2023. Only 24 are thought still to be alive, and we know from released hostages that they have been starved and tortured, chained in tunnels. They have not seen sunlight for 543 days. What is the UK Government doing to bring them home?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for raising this important issue. All of those hostages need to come home. And that's why we need to get back to a ceasefire, and that's why we must continue to stand with hostage families. Can I reassure her that I spoke to US Envoy Witkoff just on Friday evening to get an update on the conversations that are going on, and of course Egypt and Qatar play a very important role in getting back to that ceasefire and getting Hamas to do what they should do. And it was very interesting to see Palestinians taking to the streets to campaign against Hamas and the way that they are holding the Palestinian people to hostage at this time.
HIV and AIDS has killed 40 million people across the world and remains a major threat to public health. But over the weekend, the US Foreign Affairs Committee majority gloated in a sickening tweet that included an image of a coffin of the closure of USAID, something which experts state will lead to a tenfold increase in deaths from HIV and AIDS. Will the Minister reaffirm that despite the recklessness of the Trump administration, this government remains committed to working to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030?
Well, obviously the matters regarding USAID are a matter for the US government, but I can absolutely assure him that we are committed to that 2030 target, and he will know from my long time campaigning on these issues of the importance that I place on this, and indeed the Foreign Secretary.
Dr. Danny Chambers.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we know when it comes to global public health, nobody wins unless everybody wins. And an infectious disease elsewhere on the planet can affect us here as well. So what steps is the department taking to secure funding for overseas development projects that affect diseases that will specifically be a risk to the UK, including antimicrobial resistance?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman makes important points, and he will know that we make important contributions to the Global Fund and indeed other bodies on global health, and we remain committed to global health as part of our development spending, even in spite of the difficult decisions that we're having to make, and we'll hear very closely what he has to say.
John Whitby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. More than half the countries that have submitted UN biodiversity plans have not yet released plans on how they'll protect 30% of land and sea for nature, despite agreeing to do so at COP15. What steps is the government taking to ensure that more countries develop plans to protect at least 30% of land and sea?
The Government remains strongly committed to tackling the international climate and nature crises. The UK played a key role at the Biodiversity COP16 conference, and we're working closely with a wide range of partners to build global ambition on nature ahead of London Climate Action Week in June and COP30 in Brazil.
James Cleverly.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In February, the Foreign Secretary rightly criticised America's aid cuts, and then 2 weeks later was humiliated by his own Prime Minister when his departmental budget was smashed to bits. So what is he doing to re-establish his and his department's credibility on the world stage so we can once again have genuine influence internationally?
What can I say to the honourable gentleman? This government has not made an ideological decision to cut aid, and he knows that. There are other governments around the world making ideological decisions to cut aid. This government did not make the decision that the last government made, also to switch off aid overnight. We are ensuring that there are no cliff edges. And he will know, and I know he knows this, that investing in hard power also saves lives and acts as a deterrence in our own country and across much of the world.
Deputy Speaker. Last week, BBC reporter Mark Lowen was arrested and deported from Turkey after covering the ongoing protest movement as part of a broader crackdown on journalists. This followed the arrest of President Erdogan's leading political rival. Will the Minister commit to conveying the concerns of this House to their Turkish counterpart at the earliest opportunity?
The UK is a staunch supporter of democracy, the rule of law and media freedom. The government has raised recent events in Turkey with our counterparts at a number of levels. Most recently, on the 29th of March, I spoke to my Turkish counterpart, Hakan Fidan, to raise our expectation that Turkey upholds its international commitments, the rule of law, and protects the fundamental rights to free speech, peaceful assembly, and media freedom, including the treatment of British journalists reporting there.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is the British government going to act as the French and American government have done to support Morocco's autonomy plan for the Western Sahara?
We continue to have discussions with our Moroccan friends. This is a complex issue. And the position remains the position that we had under the last government. But of course, we keep these under review as we continue to discuss these issues in the region.
Foreign Affairs Secretary Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has said repeatedly that the UK should move from freezing to seizing Russian state assets, although I'm still waiting to hear what proportion of those are in the UK. Meanwhile, 300 billion sits in the EU, and when peace eventually comes, the rebuilding of Ukraine will need to be paid for by the Russians. So those frozen billions will be key. When I was at a security conference in Poland last week, everyone seemed to agree that these assets needed to be seized. So I ask the Foreign Secretary again, what are the remaining barriers to seizing those assets, and what concrete steps is he taking to ensure that he can bring our allies with us?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for raising this issue. It's a complex issue, and it's an issue where it is best to act in consort with our closest allies, recognising that allies in Belgium, in Germany, and other countries in Europe are more exposed than we are. We continue to work at pace with our allies. This will be an item, it was an item I discussed yesterday in Madrid with the Weimar Plus group, which included our Polish, French, Spanish colleagues particularly, and I'm sure it will be an item discussed at NATO foreign ministers later on this week.
Ryan Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the light of the Prime Minister's announcement of the impending ODA cuts, how will the UK government be a global leader on water security and climate-affected communities to adapt and build wash systems that are resilient to climate change?
Well, I thank the honourable member for pointing out the importance of these issues. He knows the UK has a strong record on them. Obviously, all decisions on the future ODA spending will be discussed as part of the ongoing resource allocations as part of the spending review, but I note what he says.
Development Select Committee, Sarah Champion.
Speaker, on the 23rd of March in Gaza, 8 medics from the Palestinian Red Crescent, 5 responders from the Civil Defence and a UN staff member were all killed by IDF when responding to casualties. Their bodies have been returned today. International humanitarian law is clear. Medical personnel, ambulances, humanitarian relief workers and civil defence organisations must be respected and protected. International humanitarian law is not something for debate. The Foreign Secretary understands the importance of upholding the law and holding to account all who breach it, including our friends. So why is Israel seemingly allowed to act with impunity when it comes to protecting medics, humanitarian workers and civilians?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on this day, the one-year anniversary of World Central Kitchen, I want to be clear that nobody has impunity, that we expect full legal processes to be followed, including in Israel, and the Foreign Secretary and I have both spoke about the important role that the Military Advocate General will play in that. In relation to my honourable friend's wider question, it is clearly deeply problematic that deconfliction does not exist in Gaza, that aid workers continue to be in such peril as she describes, and we will continue to use all methods at our disposal to try and improve the situation.
Final question, Stephen Gekins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 18th of March, the Foreign Secretary told this House that there had been a breach of international law by Israel in terms of blockading aid getting into Gaza. If he takes international law seriously, will he tell us what sanctions are in place as a result of that?
Minister, Foreign Secretary, Minister, anybody.
We have announced to this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, a series of sanctions in relation to risk of breaches, in relation to the attacks on aid workers, which I've covered a number of times in this session.
I'm sure the Minister can follow up in writing. That's the end of the Foreign Office and Commonwealth questions. Point of order, Sarah Champion.
On a point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker, after much chasing in October last year, the Foreign Secretary committed to give oral evidence to my committee early in the new year. He's not done so to date. We don't have a date in the diary, despite repeated requests from my committee team. So can you advise me how I can encourage the Foreign Secretary to give evidence? Much is going on in the world that we need to discuss.
Grateful to the honourable member for giving notice of her point of order. The Chair is not responsible for ministerial appearances before select committees, but I can see the Foreign Secretary is keen to respond. No doubt he will have a positive response to her statement or a point of order right now. Foreign Secretary.
Well, in response to that point of order, Madam Deputy Secretary, just to remind the House that I appeared before the Foreign Affairs Committee on the 4th of December. I will be appearing in front of the International Relations and Defence Committee of the House of Lords on the 30th of May. We have made changes to the development, as has been discussed in the House this afternoon. My honourable friend Baroness Chapman will be appearing before the International Development Committee on the 13th of May. And of course, I will appear again before the Foreign Affairs Committee and in front of the Honourable Ladies Committee in due course. And I hope to do that by the end of the summer or in the September recess period.
Right. I will give the front benches a few moments to swap over so we can prepare for the first urgent question.